Sometimes wealth makes people forget the most basic lesson my father taught me. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything. That Thursday morning, real estate mogul Jonathan Blackwell walked into my courtroom and decided that $10 million bought him the right to treat a judge like hired help. 10 minutes later, he left in handcuffs, learning that money can't buy what matters most: dignity, humility, and respect for others. This confrontation started with what should have been a simple parking violation. But nothing involving entitled millionaires is ever simple or straightforward. Blackwell owns half the commercial real estate downtown, controls millions in development projects, and thinks of Providence as his personal kingdom, where rules apply to other people, but never to him or his business interests. Tuesday afternoon, cold November rain falling steadily, he parks his $100,000 Mercedes-Benz sedan in a handicapped space directly outside City Hall. Not because he has a disability permit. He's never needed one in his privileged life. Not because all other spaces were taken. The municipal lot was half empty, with dozens of regular spots available. But because Jonathan Blackwell believes that wealth gives him the right to take spaces reserved for people who actually need accessible parking, who depend on those wider spaces and ramp access to navigate their daily lives. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, 78 years old, Korean War veteran's widow, uses a wheelchair after losing her left leg to diabetes complications, arrives for her monthly appointment at the social services office to apply for heating assistance because her fixed income can't cover rising utility costs. She drives her modified Honda Civic with hand controls, depends on handicap spaces for the extra room needed to transfer from her car to her wheelchair. Mrs. Chen finds Blackwell's luxury sedan blocking the only handicapped accessible space in the immediate vicinity.
Let this sink in for a moment. This isn't about a car. It's about consequences. A single selfish decision forced a 78-year-old woman to battle gravity, whether in neglect, just so someone else could save a few steps. Ask yourself, if laws don't protect people like Mrs. Chun, who are they really for?
Her to park 3 long blocks away on a steep hill, then wheel herself uphill on broken sidewalks in the steadily falling rain. No umbrella possible when you need both hands to push wheelchair wheels. No quick dash from car to building when every movement requires careful navigation of curbs, potholes, and accessibility barriers that able-bodied people never notice. By the time she reaches the social services office, Mrs. Chen is soaked through, exhausted from fighting both gravity and weather. 30 minutes late for her appointment because of the extra distance and difficult terrain. All because someone decided that his convenience mattered more than her accessibility. When parking enforcement officer Maria Rodriguez approaches Blackwell's illegally parked vehicle, she finds him sitting inside, talking loudly on his phone about some $1 million deal, completely aware that he's blocking handicapped access, but not caring enough to move. "Sir," Officer Rodriguez taps on his window, "you're parked in a handicapped space without proper permits. You need to move your vehicle." Blackwell rolls down his window just enough to speak, doesn't pause his phone conversation, doesn't show any recognition that he's talking to a human being with authority to cite him for violations. "I'll be done in 5 minutes," he says, waving her away like she's a fly bothering his lunch. "I'm conducting important business that can't be interrupted for parking nonsense." Parking nonsense. Taking spaces from disabled people is parking nonsense to someone who's never needed accommodation in his privileged life. "Sir," Officer Rodriguez continues patiently, "this space is reserved for disabled drivers. You need to move immediately or I'll have to write you a citation." Write whatever you want, Blackwell replies, still talking on his phone, still treating her like she's invisible. I pay more in taxes than your entire department's budget. Consider it a donation to city services. A donation to city services. Like blocking disabled access is charitable giving instead of selfish entitlement. Officer Rodriguez writes him the citation anyway. $500 fine for handicap parking violation. $200 additional penalty for blocking accessible pathways. But Blackwell doesn't just accept a ticket and move on like any reasonable person would. Instead, he calls his lawyer, his accountant, his city council connections, and anyone else he thinks can make his problems disappear with money and influence. Because in Blackwell's world, citations are for poor people who can't buy their way out of consequences. But Officer Rodriguez forwards the case to my court with a detailed report about Blackwell's attitude, his dismissive treatment of enforcement, and his apparent belief that wealth exempts him from laws designed to protect vulnerable citizens. Thursday morning, I'm reviewing Blackwell's case file when Christina walks in looking concerned. "Judge," she says, "Mr. Blackwell is here early for his hearing, and he's demanding to speak with you immediately about dismissing his citation. Tell Mr. Blackwell that he'll have his opportunity to speak during his scheduled court appearance," I reply, "just like everyone else." But Blackwell isn't used to being treated like everyone else. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, he strides into my courtroom wearing a suit that probably costs more than most people make in 6 months, gold watch that could pay someone's rent for a year, carrying himself like he owns not just half the real estate downtown, but the building where my courtroom operates. "Jonathan Blackwell," Christina calls from her desk. "Handicap parking violation, obstructing accessible pathways." Up he walks, and immediately I can see he considers this beneath his dignity. Not embarrassed, like someone caught taking resources from disabled people. Not apologetic, like a decent person who made a mistake. Just annoyed that he has to waste his valuable time on what he clearly considers a trivial matter. "Mr. Blackwell," I begin, looking at Officer Rodriguez's detailed report. "You're here because you parked in a handicapped space without proper permits, blocking access for disabled drivers. Do you understand this violation?" "Your Honor," he says, and his tone makes it clear he thinks he's talking to someone who works for him. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of this citation." A misunderstanding. Every entitled person's favorite excuse when caught breaking rules. "What kind of misunderstanding, Mr. Blackwell?" "Well," he says, adjusting his expensive watch like he's checking how much of his precious time this inconvenience is costing. "I was conducting urgent business that required immediate parking access. I wasn't blocking anything. I was utilizing available space for legitimate business purposes." Utilizing available space. "Mr. Blackwell, the space you utilize is reserved for disabled drivers with proper permits." "Your Honor, I understand that, but sometimes business requirements take priority over parking technicalities, especially when the space was temporarily unused." Parking technicalities. Temporarily unused. Like handicap spaces exist for his convenience when disabled people aren't actively using them. "Mr. Blackwell, disabled parking spaces aren't temporarily unused. They're permanently reserved for people who need accessible facilities." "I understand the theory, Your Honor, but in practice, empty handicap spaces represent inefficient resource allocation when business activities require immediate parking solutions." Business activities require immediate parking solutions. This millionaire thinks his phone calls are more important than disabled people's access to public buildings. "Mr. Blackwell," I continue, Mrs. Dorothy Chen had to park 3 blocks away and wheel herself uphill in the rain because you took her accessible space. Your Honor, he replies, and I can hear the impatience creeping into his voice. I sympathize with Mrs. Chen's situation, but my business meeting was time-sensitive and couldn't be delayed for parking logistics. Parking logistics. An elderly woman in a wheelchair, struggling through the rain, is parking logistics to someone who's never faced a mobility challenge in his entitled life. Mr. Blackwell, your business meeting wasn't more important than Mrs. Chen's access to city services. Your Honor, he says, his voice getting sharper, with all due respect, you're not qualified to judge the relative importance of different people's activities. Not qualified to judge. This arrogant millionaire just told a sitting judge that he's not qualified to judge. Mr. Blackwell, I say, standing up from my bench, I'm exactly qualified to judge violations of laws designed to protect disabled citizens. Your Honor, he continues, completely missing the warning in my tone. You're dealing with traffic violations and parking citations. I'm dealing with multi-million-dollar transactions that affect hundreds of jobs and thousands of investors. Multi-million-dollar transactions. Mr. Blackwell, your transactions don't give you the right to block handicapped access.
Here's an important legal note. Handicap parking laws aren't suggestions. They're civil rights protections. Blocking accessible pathways isn't just rude. It's a violation tied directly to disability access laws. And when attitude enters the equation, judges absolutely take notice.
They give me responsibilities that require flexibility in how I utilize public resources for legitimate business purposes. Public resources. This entitled man thinks handicapped parking spaces are public resources for his business purposes. That's when Blackwell makes the comment that seals his fate. Getting frustrated with my questions, probably not used to anyone challenging his actions so directly, he decides to explain exactly what he thinks about judicial authority. Your Honor, he says, his voice dripping with condescension, I think you are making this more complicated than necessary. I pay substantial taxes that fund this court system. I employ hundreds of people whose paychecks depend on my business success. I contribute more to this community in 1 month than most people do in their entire lives. He pauses, looks around the courtroom like he's surveying his domain, then delivers the line that changes everything. Frankly, he continues, I don't have time to sit here being lectured by a municipal court judge about parking spaces when I have real responsibilities to real people who depend on my decisions for their livelihoods. Being lectured by a municipal court judge. This arrogant millionaire just dismissed judicial authority as beneath his notice, treating a courtroom like his corporate boardroom where everyone takes orders from him. The courtroom goes quiet. Everyone, other defendants, court officers, attorneys, even Christina, is staring at this millionaire who just told the judge that he's too important to be held accountable for his actions. Mr. Blackwell, I say, my voice cutting through the silence, did you just tell this court that you're too important to be lectured about breaking the law? I told you the truth about priorities and responsibilities, he replies, but there's a slight tremor in his voice now. People like me create value. People like you just process paperwork. Process paperwork. This entitled billionaire just reduced the entire judicial system to paperwork processing. Mr. Blackwell, I continue, people like you seem to think wealth exempts you from common decency. Common decency? His voice gets louder, more aggressive. Your Honor, common decency is recognizing that successful business leaders deserve consideration for their contributions to community prosperity. Mr. Blackwell, common decency is not taking parking spaces from disabled people. Common decency is understanding that economic development requires practical flexibility from public servants who depend on tax revenue from successful businesses. Tax revenue from successful businesses. This man thinks paying taxes gives him the right to ignore laws protecting vulnerable citizens. Mr. Blackwell, I say, you seem to believe your tax payments purchase exemptions from following basic rules. They purchase the right to expect reasonable treatment from public employees whose salaries I help fund. Public employees. He just called me a public employee whose salary he funds. Like judges work for taxpayers instead of serving justice. Mr. Blackwell, I continue, judges don't work for taxpayers. We work for justice. Justice? He actually laughs. Your Honor, justice is recognizing the difference between people who create value and people who obstruct it with bureaucratic nonsense. Bureaucratic nonsense. Protecting disabled access is bureaucratic nonsense to someone who's never needed protection himself. That's when I decide this millionaire needs to learn what respect looks like when it's demanded instead of earned. Mr. Blackwell, I say, you've shown complete contempt for this court, dismissive attitude toward disabled citizens, and arrogant disregard for the law. I've shown realistic understanding of priorities and responsibilities that municipal court judges might not appreciate. You've shown exactly why entitled, wealthy people need accountability. Accountability? His voice rises with indignation. Your Honor, I don't need accountability from traffic court judges who've never built anything, created any jobs, or contributed meaningfully to community development. Never built anything, created any jobs, or contributed meaningfully. This arrogant millionaire just told the sitting judge that he's contributed nothing meaningful to society. Mr. Blackwell, I say, you're in contempt of court. Contempt? He stands up, his face red with anger. Your Honor, I'm expressing frustration with the system that wastes successful people's time over trivial violations that harm nobody. Trivial violations that forced a disabled woman to struggle through the rain. One disabled woman's minor community development, never built anything, created any jobs, or contributed meaningfully. This arrogant millionaire just told the sitting judge that he's contributed nothing meaningful to society. Mr. Blackwell, I say, you're in contempt of court. Contempt? He stands up, his face red with anger. Your Honor, I'm expressing frustration with the system that wastes successful people's time over trivial violations that harm nobody. Trivial violations that forced a disabled woman to struggle through the rain. One disabled woman's minor inconvenience versus hundreds of employees whose jobs depend on my business efficiency. Minor inconvenience. Mrs. Chen's struggle is a minor inconvenience compared to his business efficiency. Mr. Blackwell, I say, you're going to learn what major inconvenience feels like. I sentence him to the maximum fine for handicap parking violations. $500 for the parking offense, $200 for obstructing accessible pathways. But more importantly, I hold him in contempt of court for his disrespectful behavior and dismissive attitude toward judicial authority. Furthermore, I continue, you're sentenced to 40 hours of community service working with disabled veterans at the VA hospital so you can learn what accessibility actually means. Blackwell's face goes white. You can't be serious. I don't have time for community service. I have businesses to run, deals to close, responsibilities that can't be delayed. Mr. Blackwell, you should have thought about your responsibilities before taking parking spaces from disabled people. This is insane. I'll appeal this. I'll take this to federal court. You can't punish successful business leaders for minor parking violations. Mr. Blackwell, I say as his voice gets louder and more aggressive, you're making this worse for yourself. Worse? He's shouting now, completely losing control. How can it get worse? You're destroying my schedule over a parking space. You're interfering with business operations that employ hundreds of people. Mr. Blackwell, lower your voice or you'll be removed from this courtroom. Removed? He gets even louder. Your Honor, you can't remove taxpayers who fund your salary for expressing frustration with judicial overreach. Judicial overreach. Holding him accountable is judicial overreach.
This is where power, pride, and the law collide. Because when someone walks into a courtroom believing money makes them untouchable, the justice system has a way of reminding them otherwise. Stay with this story, because what starts as a parking ticket turns into a masterclass on accountability.
Mr. Blackwell, this is your final warning. My final warning? He's screaming now, his face purple with rage. Your Honor, you work for the people of this city. I am one of those people. I pay taxes. I create jobs. I deserve respect, not warnings from municipal court judges who've never accomplished anything in the real world. You work for the people. I am one of those people. This entitled millionaire thinks he can order judges around because he pays taxes. Bailiff, I say calmly, remove Mr. Blackwell from this courtroom immediately. What? Blackwell's voice cracks with disbelief. You can't remove me. I'm Jonathan Blackwell. I own half this city. You work for me. Officer Johnson approaches Blackwell with handcuffs, moving with the calm professionalism that comes from years of dealing with entitled defendants who think wealth makes them immune to consequences. Sir, Officer Johnson says, you need to come with me. This is outrageous, Blackwell shouts as they handcuff him. I demand to speak to the mayor. I demand to speak to city council. I demand recognition of my status in this community. Mr. Blackwell, I tell him, as they prepare to escort him out, your status just changed from defendant to prisoner. This won't stand. I have connections. I have influence. I'll have your job for this harassment. Mr. Blackwell, I reply, the only harassment here was your treatment of Mrs. Chen and your disrespect for this court. As they lead him toward the door, Blackwell turns back one final time, his arrogance momentarily replaced by panic and desperation. Judge Caprio, he pleads, you don't understand the economic impact of disrupting my business operations. Hundreds of jobs depend on my availability for crucial negotiations. Mr. Blackwell, I tell him, maybe spending time with disabled veterans will help you understand what really matters in life. The courtroom stays quiet for a long moment after they remove him. Other defendants seem stunned by what they've witnessed, a millionaire being held to the same standards as everyone else. Mrs. Chen, who'd been sitting in the gallery watching the proceedings, approaches my bench after court adjourns. Your Honor, she says, thank you for showing that disabled people's rights matter, even when wealthy people find them inconvenient. Mrs. Chen, I reply, everyone deserves equal access and equal respect under the law. 6 weeks later, Blackwell completed his community service at the VA hospital. His supervisor wrote to tell me that working with disabled veterans had been transformative for someone who'd never considered how mobility challenges affect daily life. 3 months after his removal from court, Blackwell personally funded the installation of additional handicap parking spaces throughout downtown Providence and established a nonprofit organization providing transportation assistance for disabled citizens. A year later, he sent me a letter. Judge Caprio, being removed from your courtroom was the best thing that ever happened to me. I learned that respect isn't something you buy, it's something you earn through how you treat others. Thank you for teaching me humility. Blackwell learned that wealth without respect is just expensive emptiness, that treating judges like employees reveals character, not status, that 10 minutes of arrogance can cost decades of reputation. My father used to say, Frank, respect is the one thing money can't buy, but disrespect is the one thing that makes all your money worthless. Jonathan Blackwell learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it completely. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, no amount of money can buy the right to disrespect others, but a little humility costs nothing and is worth everything. Thanks for listening, and God bless.